When a struggling single mother discovers an injured pilot with classified military equipment crashed in her cornfield, she never imagined that her simple act of compassion would change her life forever. As she works to save the mysterious aviator, his cryptic warnings about national security threats begin to transform not just her failing farm, but reveal a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of government. But when Air Force One lands in her field the next morning, the astonishing revelation doesn't just rescue her family's future, it exposes a plot that could reshape America's destiny and places her at the center of the most classified operation in military history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Deep in the heart of Nebraska's endless farmland, where corn stretched toward infinite horizons under starlit skies, Maria Elena Vasquez stood at the edge of her withering field, staring at something that would shatter everything she thought. She knew about her quiet rural existence. The severe drought that had plagued the region for 3 consecutive summers had driven her to check her irrigation systems one final time before accepting the inevitable. Another failed harvest that would seal her family's fate. The woman before the wreckage was unlike any crisis she'd encountered in her 35 years of fighting to keep her family's century-old farm operational. Twisted metal from what appeared to be an advanced aircraft gleamed in the moonlight, its sleek design unlike anything she'd seen in civilian aviation magazines. This wasn't just another crop duster that had experienced engine trouble over her property. This was something that belonged in science fiction movies, not scattered across her struggling corn rows. The pilot's condition was critical, yet something about his uniform and the strange equipment surrounding the crash site made Maria's heart race with a mixture of fear and inexplicable purpose. The evening had started like countless others at Esperanza Farm, Spanish for hope, a name that now seemed cruelly ironic given their circumstances. Maria had risen before dawn, as she had every day for the past decade since her husband Diego's tragic accident in the grain elevator. Troubled by the increasingly desperate situation facing her family's agricultural operation, she'd spent the morning calculating feed costs for their remaining livestock. The drought had devastated not only their corn and soybean crops, but had forced them to sell their prize breeding cattle to cover mounting expenses that seemed to multiply with each passing week. Her twin daughters, Isabella and Sophia, now 16 and preparing for college, had been working double shifts at the local diner to help cover household expenses while maintaining their academic excellence. The scholarship opportunities they'd earned through years of dedicated study represented their only path to escaping the cycle of financial hardship that had trapped their rural community for generations. Maria's mind wandered to the stack of overdue bills that sat unopened on her kitchen table. She knew what they contained, another series of final notices from creditors who had already extended payment deadlines far beyond normal business practices. The farm that her great-grandfather had established in 1923 as a modest family operation, and that her father had transformed into one of Nebraska's most productive agricultural centers, was slipping through her fingers despite her relentless efforts to maintain its operations. The farm's reputation had once drawn agricultural students and sustainable farming advocates from across the Midwest, seeking to learn about their innovative crop rotation techniques and water conservation methods that had sustained the land through previous drought cycles. Their unique approach to organic farming, combined with the natural fertility of the Platte River Valley soil, had produced yields that amazed even experienced agricultural extension agents. But the current crisis was different from anything previous generations had faced. Climate change had altered precipitation patterns in ways that rendered traditional farming wisdom obsolete, while corporate agricultural operations had driven down commodity prices to levels that made small family farms economically unsustainable. Sarah, Maria's younger sister and the farm's agricultural specialist, had been working as a consultant for larger operations to supplement their income while trying to keep Esperanza Farm viable. Their mother, Elena, who had inherited her grandmother's gift for reading weather patterns and soil conditions, had been forced to take a part-time position at the county extension office to help make ends meet. The weight of their combined sacrifices pressed heavily on Maria's shoulders as she made her evening rounds, checking irrigation lines that pumped precious water from their steadily declining well. The underground aquifer that had sustained their region for over a century showed alarming signs of depletion, forcing difficult decisions about which crops to prioritize and which fields to abandon. That's when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong in these peaceful agricultural fields. It was like a high-pitched whining mixed with mechanical grinding, growing louder as it approached from the northeast. Following the sound, she'd crossed the irrigation canal that divided their property, heading toward the section where they'd been experimenting with drought-resistant corn varieties. The noise intensified, accompanied by what appeared to be unusual lights cutting through the darkness, not the familiar navigation lights of commercial aircraft that occasionally crossed their airspace, but sharp, focused beams that seemed to scan the landscape with deliberate precision. As Maria approached the source of the disturbance, she noticed something extraordinary about the area where the lights were concentrated. The experimental corn in this section, which had been struggling like the rest of their crops, appeared, somehow different in the strange illumination, taller, more vibrant, as if responding to some unknown stimulus. The air felt charged with an energy she couldn't explain, reminiscent of the atmosphere just before severe thunderstorms that occasionally brought relief to their drought-stricken region. But this was different, more focused, more intentional, carrying an undertone of urgency that made her pulse quicken with anticipation and concern. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The crashed aircraft lay in the center of what had been their most damaged field, yet the corn surrounding the impact site stood tall and healthy, defying the drought conditions that had stunted growth throughout the rest of their property. Steam rose from the wreckage, carrying scents of fuel and heated metal mixed with something else, an almost ozone-like smell that reminded her of electrical storms. Despite the severity of the crash, the pilot was conscious, his eyes displaying an alertness that seemed almost superhuman. In her years of farm life, Maria had dealt with numerous emergencies, injured workers, equipment accidents, medical crises, but she'd never encountered someone who radiated such intense focus. Despite obvious physical trauma, the man was studying her with a mixture of professional assessment and desperate hope, as if calculating whether she could be trusted with information that extended far beyond simple crash assistance. His uniform bore insignia she didn't recognize, and the equipment scattered around the wreckage included devices that looked decades ahead of anything she'd seen in agricultural or commercial aviation. Drawing on years of experience managing farm emergencies and her basic medical training from volunteer work with the rural fire department, Maria began her approach. She spoke softly in both English and Spanish, maintaining eye contact while assessing his injuries and the immediate dangers posed by the potentially unstable aircraft. The pilot made no move to prevent her assistance. Instead, he seemed to be evaluating her responses to the situation with the intensity of someone conducting a critical interview. As she got closer, Maria could see that what should have been causing him severe distress, multiple lacerations, apparent impact injuries, possible internal trauma, seemed to be healing at a rate that defied medical explanation. More surprisingly, she could observe traces of the same strange energy that had enhanced their experimental corn, appearing to concentrate around his injuries, accelerating natural healing processes in ways that challenged everything she understood. about human physiology and emergency medicine. As the moon climbed higher over the Nebraska plains, Maria faced a decision that would forever alter not just her family's future, but potentially the course of American history. Should she immediately contact emergency services, knowing that such a call would bring authorities who might not have the pilot's best interests at heart? Or should she first try to understand what she was dealing with, aware that such a choice could either save lives or endanger everything she held dear? The pilot's next words would eliminate any possibility of treating this as a routine agricultural accident. His voice, though weakened by his injuries, carried an authority that spoke of high-level military training and access to information that could affect national security. "Ma'am, before you make any calls, you need to understand what happened. Here tonight wasn't an accident, and the people who caused this crash are probably already on their way. Your farm, your family, maybe this entire region could be in danger unless we can get word to the right people in Washington." Maria felt her world tilt on its axis as she realized that her quiet farming life was about to intersect with forces far beyond anything she'd ever imagined. The struggling agricultural operation that had seemed destined for foreclosure might suddenly become the most important piece of land in America. The pilot continued, his eyes scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit while maintaining his assessment of her trustworthiness. "My name is Captain James Morrison, and I was carrying intelligence about a threat to Homeland Security when my aircraft was sabotaged. The technology that brought me down is the same technology that could be used to attack critical infrastructure across the country." As he spoke, Maria noticed that the strange energy field surrounding the crash site was growing stronger, affecting not just the immediate area, but spreading outward through their crops in ways that seemed to revitalize the drought-damaged plants. Whatever had powered his aircraft was continuing to operate, transforming their failing farm in ways that agriculture science couldn't explain. "Ma'am, I need you to make a choice right now that could affect millions of people. There's a communication device in my survival kit that can reach a very specific person in the Pentagon, but using it will also reveal our location to hostile forces. Are you prepared to put your family at risk to help save your country?" Maria looked at this mysterious pilot, then at her reviving cornfield, then toward the farmhouse where her daughters slept peacefully, unaware that their mother was about to make a decision that would change their lives forever. The farm that had been her family's source of struggle and pride was about to become ground zero for a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of American government. In the distance, the faint sound of approaching helicopters began to echo across the plains, and Maria realized that whether she was ready or not, extraordinary events were already in motion. Her choice was no longer whether to get involved. It was whether to trust this mysterious pilot or the unknown forces that were clearly pursuing him. The quiet Nebraska farm woman, who had spent years fighting drought and financial hardship, was about to discover that sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought with tractors and irrigation systems, but with courage and conviction when ordinary people are called to do extraordinary things. Maria's decision came with the sound of distant rotors cutting through the Nebraska night air. Without hesitation, she helped Captain Morrison activate his emergency communication device, a piece of technology that looked like something from a science fiction movie, but operated with the precision of military engineering. The encrypted signal that burst forth from the device would reach the Pentagon within seconds, but it would also broadcast their exact location to anyone monitoring those frequencies. "Mayday, Mayday. This is Falcon 77 requesting immediate extraction and presidential notification." Morrison spoke into the device with the calm authority of someone accustomed to life or death communications. "Package is secure, but hostile forces are converging on coordinates 40, 7982 north, 98, 5795 west. Civilian family on site requires immediate protection." Maria felt her heart racing as she processed what she'd just heard. Presidential notification? What kind of pilot required direct communication with the commander-in-chief? Before she could ask these questions, Morrison was already struggling to his feet, his injuries seeming to heal at an impossible rate under the influence of whatever. Energy fields surrounded his aircraft. "Ma'am, I need you to listen carefully," he said, his voice gaining strength with each passing moment. "In approximately 45 minutes, you're going to see helicopters approaching from multiple directions. Some of them will be trying to help. Others will be trying to eliminate witnesses. Your ability to tell the difference might determine whether your family survives the night." The implications of his words hit Maria like a physical blow. Her daughters were sleeping peacefully in the farmhouse, completely unaware that their mother had just made a decision that put their lives in immediate danger. But something about Morrison's manner, his professional competence, his obvious concern for her family's welfare, the strange healing properties of his technology, convinced her that she'd made the right choice. "Captain, I need to wake my daughters and get them to safety," Maria said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "But first, I need to understand what we're dealing with. What was so important that someone was willing to sabotage a military aircraft to stop you from delivering it?" Morrison looked toward the horizon, where the sound of approaching aircraft was growing louder, then back at Maria with an expression that mixed professional respect with personal gratitude. "I was carrying evidence of a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of government, people who have been selling classified military technology to foreign powers, while simultaneously sabotaging American agricultural infrastructure to create food shortages that would justify martial law." As he spoke, Maria noticed that the energy field emanating from his crashed aircraft was continuing to transform their drought-stricken crops in ways that seemed to demonstrate advanced agricultural enhancement technology. The corn that had been withering just hours ago now stood tall and vibrant, displaying growth patterns that would normally take weeks to achieve. "The technology in my aircraft isn't just military hardware," Morrison continued, monitoring multiple devices that had survived the crash. "It's part of a revolutionary agricultural enhancement system that could end world hunger while simultaneously serving as a defense against weather manipulation weapons that certain foreign governments have been developing." The scope of what he was describing began to sink in as Maria watched their experimental cornfields transform before her eyes. This wasn't just about military secrets or political conspiracies. This was about technology that could fundamentally change agriculture and potentially save millions of lives worldwide. "The people who shot me down tonight aren't just trying to steal military secrets," Morrison explained, his voice taking on an urgency that made Maria's pulse quicken. "They're trying to prevent this technology from reaching the agricultural community because it would make their weather manipulation weapons obsolete while solving the food security crisis they've been using to destabilize governments around the world." Maria's mind raced as she processed the implications of what she was hearing. Her family's struggling farm wasn't just the site of a random aircraft crash. It had become ground zero for a battle that could determine the future of global food security and national sovereignty. The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder, and Morrison began preparing defensive positions using equipment that had scattered across the crash site. "Ma'am, I need you to make another choice. You can take your daughters and leave right now. Head to town, stay with relatives. Let the authorities handle this situation, or you can help me protect this technology until the right people arrive to secure it." Before Maria could respond, lights appeared in the distance, not the searchlights of rescue helicopters, but the focused beams of aircraft conducting tactical surveillance. Morrison's expression hardened as he recognized the flight patterns of the approaching vehicles. "Those aren't our people," he said grimly, checking weapons that Maria hadn't noticed among the wreckage. The first wave is always the cleanup crew. They'll try to eliminate all evidence of what happened here, including witnesses. Maria felt a surge of protective fury that surprised her with its intensity. This was her land, her family's heritage, her daughter's future that was being threatened by forces she barely understood. The same determination that had sustained her through years of drought, financial hardship, and single parenthood now focused on protecting not just her family, but potentially millions of people who could benefit from the technology that had literally fallen from the sky onto her farm. "Captain Morrison," she said with quiet resolve, "my great-grandfather built this farm with his bare hands after fleeing persecution in Mexico. My father defended this land during the farm crisis of the 1980s, when corporations tried to force him into bankruptcy. I've spent the last 10 years fighting drought and debt to keep this place operational for my daughters. I'm not about to let some conspirators destroy everything we've built." Morrison smiled for the first time since the crash, recognizing the steel beneath Maria's compassionate exterior. "In that case, ma'am, we need to get your daughters to the root cellar beneath your farmhouse and prepare for a very long night. The good news is that the energy field from my aircraft is creating a defensive perimeter that will make it very difficult for hostile forces to approach undetected. The bad news is that they'll keep coming until either we're eliminated or the cavalry arrives." As they hurried toward the farmhouse, Maria's mind was already calculating the resources they'd need to survive until help arrived. The old root cellar had been stocked with emergency supplies during the Cold War era, and the farmhouse itself had been built with the solid construction techniques of the 1920s that could withstand severe weather, and hopefully small arms fire. Isabella and Sophia were awake by the time Maria reached their bedroom, their years of farm life having taught them to recognize the sound of approaching helicopters. Their mother's tense expression and the presence of a uniformed stranger made it clear that this wasn't a routine agricultural emergency. "Mija," Maria said to her daughters, using the Spanish endearment that always signaled serious family discussions, "I need you both to listen carefully and do exactly what I tell you. This man is Captain Morrison, and he's going to help us protect our farm from some very dangerous people." The twins exchanged glances that spoke of shared understanding, built through years of facing challenges together. At 16, they'd already demonstrated the maturity and resilience that came from growing up in a family where everyone contributed to survival. "Mom, are we in danger?" Sophia asked, her voice steady despite the obvious concern in her eyes. "Yes, Mija, we are," Maria replied honestly. "But we're going to handle this the same way we've handled every other challenge, together with courage and by doing what's right even when it's difficult." Isabella, who had inherited her mother's practical nature and her late father's mechanical aptitude, was already assessing the situation with the analytical mind that had earned her early acceptance to engineering programs at several universities. "Captain Morrison, what kind of defensive capabilities does your aircraft technology provide, and how long do we need to hold out until reinforcements arrive?" Morrison looked impressed by the teenager's direct question and military-style thinking. "Your aircraft's energy field creates an electromagnetic barrier that will disrupt most electronic targeting systems, but it won't stop determined ground forces. We need to maintain defensive positions for approximately 6 hours until a specialized military unit can reach us." As they prepared the farmhouse for what was essentially a siege, Maria felt a strange sense of clarity settling over her. The financial pressures, the drought, the uncertainty about their future, all of these concerns seemed smaller now compared to the immediate challenge of protecting her family and preserving technology that could benefit humanity. The energy field from Morrison's aircraft was continuing to transform their property in ways that suggested its agricultural applications were even more revolutionary than its military capabilities. Their vegetable garden was showing signs of accelerated growth. Their fruit trees were developing new shoots despite the season, and even their drought-stressed pastures were beginning to show patches of revitalized grass. "Captain," Maria said, as they secured the farmhouse windows and prepared defensive positions, "if this technology could really solve world hunger, why would anyone want to suppress it?" Morrison paused in his preparations to look directly at her. "Because, ma'am, there are people who profit from scarcity, who maintain power by controlling resources. Agricultural abundance would redistribute global power in ways that threaten existing economic structures. Some individuals would rather see millions starve than lose their ability to manipulate food supplies for political gain." The moral clarity of their situation struck Maria with stunning force. This wasn't just about protecting her family or even her farm. It was about defending technology that could save lives on a global scale. The struggling single mother who had spent years fighting to keep her agricultural operation viable was now standing at the center of a battle for the future of world agriculture. As the first hostile helicopters appeared on the horizon, their searchlights beginning to sweep the farmland, Maria gathered her daughters close and spoke words that would become family legend for generations to come. "Remember this moment, girls. Tonight, we're not just defending our farm. We're defending hope itself, the same hope that brought your great-great-grandfather to this country, the same hope that has sustained our family through every crisis, the same hope that will carry you both to futures brighter than anything we can imagine today." The sound of approaching aircraft grew louder, but Maria no longer felt fear. She felt purpose. The farm that had been struggling to survive was about to become the most important piece of agricultural land in America, and the family that had been fighting poverty was about to demonstrate that ordinary people could rise to extraordinary challenges when the stakes were high enough. Morrison checked his weapons one final time and looked at Maria with respect that spoke of professional soldier recognizing another warrior. "Ma'am, I've served in combat zones around the world, but I've never fought alongside anyone with more courage than you're showing tonight. Your daughters are lucky to have you as their mother." As the first shots rang out across the Nebraska plains, Maria Vasquez, single mother, struggling farmer, and now defender of revolutionary technology, prepared to show the world that heroes aren't always found in military uniforms or government offices. Sometimes they're found in farmhouses, protecting their families and their principles with nothing but determination and the unshakable belief that doing what's right is always worth the risk. The first wave of hostile helicopters descended on Esperanza Farm like mechanical vultures, their searchlights cutting through the darkness as automatic weapons fire erupted across the peaceful Nebraska countryside. Maria crouched in the fortified farmhouse with her daughters, watching through reinforced windows as Captain Morrison's predictions proved devastatingly accurate. These weren't rescue teams, they were elimination squads. But something extraordinary was happening that none of them had anticipated. The energy field radiating from Morrison's crashed aircraft wasn't just protecting them from electronic targeting systems. It was actively disrupting the attackers' equipment in ways that turned their technological advantages into liabilities. Helicopter engines began sputtering as they entered the field's perimeter, forcing emergency landings that scattered hostile forces across the farm in disorganized clusters. "This is impossible," Morrison muttered, monitoring readings on devices that had survived his crash. "The field strength is increasing exponentially. It should be dissipating by now, not growing stronger." He looked toward Maria with an expression of dawning amazement. "Ma'am, I think your land is somehow amplifying the technology's effects." Through the chaos of the firefight, Maria noticed something that made her heart race with hope rather than fear. Their neighbors' farms, which had been struggling with the same drought conditions, were beginning to show signs of the same miraculous agricultural transformation that had started on their property. The energy field was expanding beyond Esperanza Farm, revitalizing the entire valley in ways that suggested the technology's true potential was far greater than anyone had imagined. Isabella, monitoring communications equipment that Morrison had given her, suddenly straightened with excitement. "Mom, I'm picking up radio transmissions from farmers all across the county. They're reporting that their crops are recovering, their wells are refilling, and their livestock are showing improved health. Whatever this technology is doing, it's spreading through the entire agricultural region." The implications hit Maria like a revelation. This wasn't just about advanced military hardware or even revolutionary farming techniques. They were witnessing the emergence of technology that could literally heal damaged ecosystems on a massive scale. The drought that had devastated their region for 3 years was being reversed in real time by systems that worked in harmony with natural processes rather than against them. Sophia, who had inherited her grandmother's intuitive understanding of land and weather patterns, made an observation that changed everyone's perspective on what they were defending. "Look at how the energy field is moving through the irrigation channels and following the root systems of the crops. It's not just random, it's learning the landscape and optimizing itself to help the plants most efficiently." Morrison stopped his defensive preparations to stare at the teenager with professional amazement. "Young lady, you've just identified something that our best military scientists missed during months of testing. This technology isn't just advanced, it's adaptive artificial intelligence that's specifically designed to enhance biological systems." As the battle continued around them, Maria began to understand that her farm hadn't been chosen randomly as a crash site. The combination of their sustainable farming practices, their diverse crop rotation systems, and the natural characteristics of their land had created the perfect testing ground for technology that required harmony between artificial intelligence and organic processes. The hostile forces, realizing that their conventional weapons were ineffective against targets protected by the energy field, began attempting to breach the perimeter using ground-based approaches. But they encountered something that none of them had prepared for. The local farming community had awakened to the sound of gunfire and was responding with the same protective instincts that had sustained rural America for generations. Miguel Santos, their neighbor, whose family had farmed the adjacent property for 40 years, arrived with 3 of his sons and enough hunting rifles to outfit a small militia. "Maria, nobody shoots up our valley without dealing with all of us," he called out as his family took defensive positions around the farmhouse. "We heard on the radio what's happening to our crops. Whatever you're protecting, it's helping all of us." Within 30 minutes, farmers from across the county were arriving to defend Esperanza Farm, not just because they wanted to protect their neighbors, but because they could see their own land beginning to recover from years of drought and economic hardship. The technology that had crashed on Maria's property was transforming the entire agricultural region, and every farmer understood instinctively that this was worth fighting for. Dr. Sarah Chen, an agricultural scientist from the University of Nebraska who had been monitoring unusual energy readings across the state, arrived with equipment that could analyze what was happening in real time. Her initial readings confirmed what everyone could see with their own eyes. The technology was creating a cascade effect that was healing damaged soil, optimizing water usage, and enhancing crop productivity on a scale that defied conventional agricultural science. "This is revolutionary beyond anything we imagined possible," Dr. Chen announced, her voice filled with scientific wonder. "The energy field is creating symbiotic relationships between artificial intelligence and plant biology that are producing Agricultural yields 3 times higher than anything achieved through traditional methods, while simultaneously reducing water consumption by 60%. As dawn approached, the hostile forces found themselves facing not just a defended farmhouse, but an entire rural community that had rallied to protect technology that was literally saving their way of life. The psychological impact of fighting against families defending their homes and their futures proved too much for mercenaries who had signed up for a simple cleanup operation. But the real surprise came as the sun rose over the Nebraska plains. The distinctive sound of military helicopters approaching from the southeast announced the arrival of forces that Captain Morrison recognized immediately: the Presidential Security Detail, accompanied by aircraft bearing the markings of the U.S. Air Force's most classified units. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison announced with visible relief, "the cavalry has arrived." The lead helicopter that landed in Maria's cornfield carried passengers that made everyone present understand the true significance of what they had been defending. Secretary of Defense Patricia Williams emerged first, followed by Dr. Marcus Thompson, the nation's leading expert on agricultural technology and climate change adaptation. But it was the third passenger who made Maria's heart skip a beat with the realization of how completely her life was about to change. General Robert Hayes, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, approached their defensive positions with an expression that mixed military authority with profound personal gratitude. "Captain Morrison," the general said, returning the pilot's salute, "your successful protection of the agricultural renaissance system has potentially saved millions of lives worldwide. The intelligence you gathered about the conspiracy to suppress this technology has led to arrests at the highest levels of both government and private industry." He turned to Maria with respect that spoke of one leader acknowledging another. "Mrs. Vasquez, your decision to help Captain Morrison and defend this technology has demonstrated the kind of courage that defines American character at its finest. Your farm has become the epicenter of an agricultural revolution that will change how we feed the world." Dr. Thompson stepped forward with readings from portable equipment that had been monitoring the energy field's effects throughout the night. "The symbiotic relationship between this technology and your land has created a model for sustainable agriculture that we can now replicate worldwide. The drought resistance, enhanced soil fertility, and optimized water usage we're seeing here could end food scarcity globally within 5 years." As Maria processed the implications of what she was hearing, Isabella asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "So what happens to our farm now? Do we lose our home because it's become important to national security?" Secretary Williams smiled with warmth that humanized her official authority. "Quite the opposite, young lady. Your family's farm is being designated as the primary research and development center for the Agricultural Renaissance Program. Your mother will be appointed as the Civilian Liaison Director, ensuring that this technology benefits family farmers rather than replacing them." The financial struggles that had threatened to destroy their family's agricultural legacy were being transformed into opportunities that exceeded Maria's wildest dreams. But more importantly, the technology that had crashed on their farm was being developed in ways that would strengthen rural communities rather than eliminate them. Dr. Chen, who had been documenting the technology's effects throughout the crisis, made an announcement that brought tears to Maria's eyes. "The energy field has stabilized at levels that will maintain enhanced agricultural productivity indefinitely. Your farm and the entire valley will serve as a permanent demonstration of how advanced technology can work in harmony with traditional farming values." As government scientists began setting up permanent monitoring stations and research facilities across Esperanza Farm, Maria gathered her daughters close and spoke words that would become family legend. "Remember this moment, girls. We didn't just save our farm, we helped save farming itself. The same values that your great-great-grandfather brought to this land. Hard work, courage, and caring for others. Those values just changed the world. Sophia, watching as their neighbors returned to their own farms to find their crops miraculously restored, made an observation that captured the true significance of what had happened. "Mum, we're not just farmers anymore, are we? We're guardians of something that could help feed everyone." Captain Morrison, his injuries now completely healed by the technology he'd helped protect, approached Maria with a formal document that would formalize her new role in the Agricultural Renaissance program. "Ma'am, on behalf of the United States, government and the millions of people worldwide who will benefit from what you've protected, I want to thank you for proving that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they have the courage to do what's right. The hostile forces that had attacked their farm were being rounded up by military police, their conspiracy exposed by evidence that Morrison had successfully delivered despite the attempts to stop him. The technology they had tried to suppress would now be shared with agricultural communities worldwide, ensuring that no one could profit from artificial food scarcity again. As the sun climbed higher over the Nebraska plains, Maria stood in her cornfield, now lush and vibrant despite years of drought, surrounded by government officials, military personnel, and agricultural scientists who were planning a future where advanced technology would strengthen rather than replace family farming. The struggling single mother who had feared losing her family's land had instead become the guardian of technology that would preserve agricultural communities worldwide. The farm that had been threatened with foreclosure was now the most valuable agricultural property in America, not because of its monetary worth, but because of its role in demonstrating how technology and tradition could work together to feed the world. But perhaps most importantly, Maria had shown her daughters that when faced with impossible choices, the decision to help others and do what's right, regardless of personal risk, could literally change the world. The values that had sustained their family through generations of challenges had proven powerful enough to protect revolutionary technology and transform the future of global agriculture. As preparations began for the arrival of Air Force One later that morning, Maria realized that their greatest adventure was just beginning. The farm that had been their refuge from the world was about to become a bridge to a better future for millions of people worldwide. The distinctive roar of Air Force One's engines echoed across the Nebraska plains at precisely 10:47 a.m., marking the moment when Maria Vasquez's humble cornfield became the most significant piece of agricultural real estate in American history. As the presidential aircraft touched down on the makeshift runway that military engineers had constructed overnight, Maria stood with her daughters watching the impossible become reality. The President of the United States was landing on their farm. President Katherine Morrison emerged from Air Force One with an entourage that included the world's leading experts on agricultural policy, climate change, and international development. But it was her first words to Maria that demonstrated the profound personal impact of what had transpired on Esperanza Farm. "Mrs. Vasquez," the president said, extending her hand with genuine warmth, "Captain Morrison is my nephew. When he radioed that a Nebraska farmer had risked her life to protect technology that could end world hunger, I knew I had to meet the woman who embodied everything great about American character. The revelation that the pilot Maria had saved was the president's family member added layers of significance to their encounter that neither woman had anticipated. This wasn't just about national security or agricultural technology. It was about the personal bonds that connected individual acts of courage to global transformation. As they walked through the transformed cornfield, President Morrison listened intently while Dr. Chen explained the unprecedented agricultural enhancements that had occurred overnight. The energy field from the crashed aircraft had not only revitalized Esperanza Farm, but had created a model for sustainable agriculture that challenged fundamental assumptions about food production and environmental conservation. The implications extend far beyond American agriculture, Dr. Thompson reported, displaying data from monitoring stations that had been tracking the technology's effects across the region. Preliminary calculations suggest that implementing this system globally could increase food production by 400%, while reducing water consumption by 70%, and eliminating the need for chemical fertilizers entirely. Isabella, who had been quietly observing the presidential delegation, stepped forward with a question that demonstrated the analytical thinking that would soon make her famous in agricultural engineering circles. Madam President, how do we ensure that this technology helps family farmers like us rather than being monopolized by corporate agriculture? President Morrison smiled at the teenager's directness and strategic thinking. That's exactly why your mother's role in this program is so crucial, Isabella. The Agricultural Renaissance Initiative will be structured to prioritize family farms and rural communities, ensuring that the benefits of this technology strengthen rather than replace traditional farming values. As they toured the research facilities that had been established overnight, Maria learned that her farm was becoming the headquarters for a global network of agricultural development centers. Scientists from every continent were requesting access to study the symbiotic relationship between the alien technology and Earth's biological systems, with Esperanza Farm serving as the primary research hub. But the true scope of the transformation became clear when President Morrison announced the creation of the Global Food Security Alliance, an international partnership that would share the agricultural renaissance technology with developing nations. Facing food scarcity and climate challenges, Maria's decision to protect a crashed pilot had initiated a chain of events that would literally feed the world. Mrs. Vasquez, the president continued, I'm offering you the position of Global Director of Agricultural Renaissance Programs, with full diplomatic status and the resources to implement this technology worldwide. Your farm will remain your home, but it will also become the symbol of how individual courage can create global change. The magnitude of the opportunity was overwhelming, but Maria's response came from the same instincts that had driven her to help Captain Morrison, despite the obvious dangers. Madam President, I accept on one condition, that this technology is shared freely with any farmer or nation that commits to using it for feeding people rather than accumulating wealth. The president's laugh was filled with admiration for Maria's negotiating skills and moral clarity. Mrs. Vasquez, you drive a harder bargain than most diplomats. Consider it done. As the presidential delegation prepared comprehensive plans for global implementation, Sophia made an observation that would become central to the program's philosophy. The technology isn't just making our crops grow better, it's teaching us to work with nature instead of against it. Maybe that's the real revolution here. Dr. Chen, who had been studying the teenager's insights throughout the crisis, nodded with scientific excitement. Sophia has identified the core principle that makes this technology so revolutionary. It doesn't dominate natural systems. It enhances them by creating harmonious relationships between artificial intelligence and biological processes. The implications of this approach extended far beyond agriculture. Military strategists were already exploring how the same principles could be applied to environmental restoration, disaster recovery, and climate change adaptation. The technology that had crashed on a Nebraska farm was revealing applications that could transform humanity's relationship with the planet. Miguel Santos, whose family had been among the first neighbors to defend Esperanza Farm, approached President Morrison with a proposal that demonstrated the grassroots innovation that would define the agricultural renaissance movement. Madam President, we want to establish a network of family farms throughout the Midwest that can serve as training centers for farmers from around the world. Let them learn from us, and let us learn from them. The President's immediate approval of this proposal reflected her understanding that the technology's success would depend on the wisdom and dedication of farming families rather than government bureaucracy. The Global Food Security Alliance would be built on partnerships between international diplomacy and rural community values. As news of the agricultural renaissance program spread through global media, responses poured in from every continent. Developing nations facing food shortages requested immediate access to the technology. Environmental organizations praised the program's potential for reversing climate change effects. Agricultural scientists worldwide began collaborating on research projects that would optimize the technology for different climates and crop types. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from farming communities worldwide, who recognized in Maria's story the validation of values they had maintained for generations. The belief that hard work, courage, and caring for others could make a difference in the world had just been proven on the largest possible scale. Isabella, who had been documenting the entire experience for a journalism project, made an announcement that brought tears to her mother's eyes. I'm changing my college major from engineering to agricultural diplomacy. I want to help implement this technology in developing countries and ensure that it truly benefits the people who need it most. Zofia, inspired by her sister's example, declared her own commitment to the cause. I'm going to study agricultural biology and environmental science. If this technology can heal damaged ecosystems, I want to help bring it to places where climate change has destroyed traditional farming. Maria looked at her daughters with pride that transcended any personal achievement. The struggling single mother who had feared for her children's future was now watching them prepare to lead a global movement that would define their generation's relationship with food security and environmental stewardship. Captain Morrison, fully recovered from his injuries and now serving as military liaison to the agricultural renaissance program, approached Maria with a final revelation that would complete her understanding of what had truly happened on her farm. Ma'am, I need to tell you something that will explain why the technology responded so dramatically to your land. He led her to a section of the cornfield where the energy readings were strongest, pointing to soil samples that revealed extraordinary mineral compositions. Your great-grandfather didn't choose this land randomly when he established the farm. The geological surveys we've conducted show that this area sits on a rare earth element deposit that creates optimal conditions for the technology's biological integration systems. The implication was stunning. Maria's family had been unknowingly preparing for this moment for nearly a century. Their sustainable farming practices, their commitment to soil conservation, their intuitive understanding of natural systems had all contributed to creating the perfect environment for revolutionary technology to flourish. It's like the land itself was waiting for the right moment and the right people to reveal its potential, Dr. Chen observed, reviewing data that confirmed the symbiotic relationship between the farm's natural characteristics and the crashed aircraft systems. As the sun began to set on this extraordinary day, President Morrison gathered everyone present for a ceremony that would formalize Maria's new role and establish the principles that would guide the agricultural renaissance program worldwide. The simple cornfield that had been struggling to survive was now the site of international treaty signings and diplomatic protocols that would reshape global agriculture. Today, The president announced, "We're not just launching a new agricultural program, we're demonstrating that the American dream of individual opportunity, creating collective benefit, remains as powerful today as it was when this nation was founded." Maria Vasquez has shown us that heroes aren't found only in government offices or corporate boardrooms. They're found in farmhouses, protecting their families and their principles with courage that can literally change the world. As Air Force One prepared for departure, carrying with it signed agreements that would begin implementing the agricultural renaissance program on every continent, Maria stood with her daughters, watching the sunset paint their transformed cornfield in shades of gold and amber. The energy field that had saved their crops continued to pulse gently through the soil, a permanent reminder of the night when everything changed. "Remember this moment, girls," Maria said, echoing words she had spoken before, but now with deeper meaning. "We didn't just save our farm. We helped show the world that technology and tradition, progress and values can work together to create something better than either could achieve alone." Isabella, already planning her first international agricultural diplomacy mission, smiled at her mother with a mixture of love and professional respect. "Mom, you know what the best part of all this is? Tomorrow, we still have to milk the cows and check the irrigation systems. No matter how famous our farm becomes, we're still farmers first." Sophia, who had been documenting the day's events in detailed notes for future agricultural historians, made a final observation that captured the true significance of their transformation. The world changed today because when Mom had to choose between safety and doing what was right, she chose to help someone who needed it. That's not just farming wisdom, that's human wisdom. As the presidential aircraft disappeared into the evening sky, Maria realized that their greatest adventure was just beginning. The farm that had been their struggle was now their platform for helping to feed the world. The family that had been fighting to survive was now leading a global movement that would define the future of agriculture and environmental stewardship. The Agricultural Renaissance Program would go on to transform farming communities worldwide, ending food scarcity in developing nations while revitalizing rural economies in developed countries. But its success would always be traced back to a Nebraska cornfield where a struggling single mother proved that ordinary people, when faced with extraordinary circumstances, can make choices that literally change the world. The energy field that had saved Esperanza Farm continued to pulse through the soil, carrying with it not just enhanced agricultural productivity, but the proof that courage, compassion, and the willingness to help others remain the most powerful forces for positive change in human history. Maria Vasquez had saved more than a crashed pilot. She had saved the future of farming itself, ensuring that the values that built America's agricultural heritage would continue to feed the world for generations to come. 6 months after Air Force One first landed in her cornfield, Maria Vasquez stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, representing not just American agriculture, but the voice of family farmers worldwide. The transformation from struggling single mother to global agricultural ambassador had challenged every assumption about leadership and diplomacy. But it was her authentic connection to the land and the people who worked it that made her message resonate across cultural and political boundaries. "Distinguished delegates," Maria began, her voice carrying the same quiet strength that had sustained her through years of drought and financial hardship. 6 months ago, I was facing bankruptcy and the loss of my family's century-old farm. Today, I stand before you as living proof that when we choose cooperation over competition, when we choose to help rather than to harm, we can solve problems that have challenged humanity for generations. The Agricultural Renaissance Program had exceeded every projection for global implementation, Developing nations in sub-Saharan Africa were reporting crop yields that had tripled within months of installing the technology. Island nations facing rising sea levels were using the system's water conservation capabilities to maintain agricultural productivity, despite increasing salinity. Mountain communities that had been abandoning farming due to climate change were discovering new possibilities for sustainable food production. But the program's success was measured not just in statistics, but in the stories of individual families whose lives had been transformed. Maria carried with her letters from farmers on every continent, each describing how the technology had provided not just improved crops, but renewed hope for their children's futures. Isabella, now enrolled in the world's first agricultural diplomacy program at Georgetown University, had spent her summer break working with farming cooperatives in Guatemala, helping them integrate the Renaissance technology with traditional indigenous farming practices. Her reports from the field demonstrated how the system's adaptive artificial intelligence was learning to enhance rather than replace centuries of accumulated agricultural wisdom. The technology doesn't just increase yields, Isabella had written to her mother. It's preserving genetic diversity in heirloom crops while making them more resilient to climate change. We're not losing traditional knowledge, we're amplifying it through symbiotic relationships between human wisdom and artificial intelligence. Sophia, who had become the youngest researcher ever accepted into the Agricultural Renaissance Program's Advanced Biotechnology Division, was working on applications that extended far beyond farming. Her breakthrough research on using the energy field technology for ecosystem restoration was already showing promising results in areas damaged by industrial pollution and deforestation. The same principles that heal damaged soil can heal damaged watersheds, damaged forests, even damaged ocean coral reefs, Sophia explained during a video call from her research station in Costa Rica. We're not just feeding the world, we're healing it. The global impact of the program was creating diplomatic opportunities that transcended traditional international relations. Countries that had been suspicious of American technological dominance were embracing the agricultural renaissance because of its open-source approach and its focus on empowering local communities rather than creating dependencies. Dr. Amara Okafor, Nigeria's Minister of Agriculture, had become one of Maria's closest international colleagues. Her success in implementing the technology across West Africa had transformed the region from a food-importing area to a food-exporting powerhouse within 6 months. Maria showed us that advanced technology doesn't have to replace our farming traditions, Dr. Okafor had told the African Union. It can make our traditions stronger and more effective than ever before. The economic implications of the agricultural renaissance were reshaping global markets in ways that prioritized sustainability and community development over corporate profits. The technology's licensing agreements required that any commercial applications include provisions for sharing benefits with local farming communities, ensuring that the people who had always fed the world would continue to benefit from doing so. Miguel Santos, whose family farm had become a major training center for international agricultural delegations, found himself hosting visitors from countries he had never heard of before the program began. Every week, we have farmers from different continents learning from each other on our land, he told Maria during one of their regular coordination meetings. The technology brought them here, but it's the shared experience of working the earth that creates the real bonds. The success stories emerging from the program were inspiring innovations that extended far beyond the original technology. Agricultural universities worldwide were developing new curricula that combined advanced biotechnology with traditional farming wisdom. Rural communities were creating exchange programs that allowed young farmers to learn from their counterparts across the globe. International development organizations were restructuring their approaches to focus on empowering local agricultural capacity rather than creating aid dependencies. Captain Morrison, who had taken a leave of absence from military service to coordinate the program's security aspects, regularly briefed Maria on the broader geopolitical implications of their work. "The conspiracy we uncovered was just the beginning," he explained during one of his visits to Esperanza Farm. "There were powerful interests invested in maintaining food scarcity as a tool of political control. Your decision to protect the technology didn't just save lives, it prevented wars that could have been fought over agricultural resources." The transformation of global food security was creating ripple effects that touched every aspect of international relations. Refugee crises caused by agricultural failures were becoming less common as communities worldwide gained access to drought-resistant and climate-adaptive farming techniques. Political stability in developing regions was improving as food security reduced social tensions and created economic opportunities for young people. But perhaps the most profound impact of the Agricultural Renaissance program was its effect on how humanity viewed its relationship with the natural world. The technology's success demonstrated that prosperity didn't require environmental destruction, that feeding a growing population didn't necessitate depleting natural resources, and that advanced technology could enhance rather than replace ecological systems. Environmental organizations that had initially been skeptical of the program became its strongest advocates as data confirmed its positive ecological effects. The Worldwide Wildlife Federation reported that areas implementing the agricultural Renaissance technology were showing increased biodiversity as the system's enhancement of soil health created habitats that supported a wider range of species. Dr. Chen, who had become the program's chief scientific coordinator, was documenting ecological improvements that exceeded their most optimistic projections. "The technology isn't just making farming more efficient," she reported to the United Nations Environmental Council. "It's demonstrating that human activity can actually improve natural systems when we work in partnership with biological processes rather than in opposition to them." The success of the Agricultural Renaissance program was inspiring similar approaches in other sectors. Urban planners were applying the program's principles to create cities that enhanced rather than degraded their natural environments. Energy. Companies were developing renewable systems that worked symbiotically with natural processes. Manufacturing industries were exploring how artificial intelligence could optimize production while minimizing environmental impact. Maria's role as Global Director of Agricultural Renaissance Programs had evolved beyond anything she could have imagined when she first helped Captain Morrison in her cornfield. She was now consulting with world leaders on food security policy, advising international development organizations on sustainable agriculture strategies, and serving as a bridge between advanced technology and traditional farming communities. But she had never lost sight of her roots or her fundamental mission. Every month, she returned to Esperanza Farm to work alongside her neighbors, maintaining her connection to the land and the community that had shaped her values. The farm that had nearly been lost to bankruptcy was now a pilgrimage site for agricultural innovators worldwide, but it remained first and foremost a working farm where the Vasquez family continued to grow corn and raise cattle. The agricultural enhancement technology continued to evolve, with the artificial intelligence systems learning from each implementation and developing new capabilities for addressing specific regional challenges. Farmers in Arctic regions were achieving year-round food production using techniques developed in partnership with the system's adaptive learning algorithms. Desert communities were creating oasis agricultural systems that transformed arid landscapes into productive farmland while conserving precious water resources. International agricultural competitions had been transformed by the program's emphasis on collaboration over competition. Instead of individual farms competing for highest yields, regional farming networks were working together to optimize productivity across entire watersheds and ecological systems. The concept of agricultural success was being redefined from individual profit maximization to community prosperity and environmental enhancement. Educational institutions worldwide were establishing agricultural renaissance studies programs that combined technological innovation with traditional farming wisdom, environmental science, and international development. Students from urban backgrounds were discovering connections to agriculture they had never imagined, while students from farming families were finding ways to blend their heritage with cutting-edge innovation. The program's influence on global youth was particularly remarkable. Young people who had been abandoning rural areas for urban opportunities were returning to farming with excitement about the possibilities offered by enhanced agricultural technology. Agricultural careers were being redefined from subsistence occupations to leadership positions in global sustainability efforts. Maria's daughters had become international symbols of the next generation of agricultural leaders. Isabella's work in agricultural diplomacy was creating new models for international cooperation that prioritized shared prosperity over competitive advantage. Sophia's research in ecosystem restoration was demonstrating how the program's principles could address environmental challenges beyond food production. As Maria prepared to address the General Assembly about the program's first-year achievements, she reflected on the journey that had brought her family from the edge of financial ruin to the center of a global transformation. The struggling single mother who had feared losing her heritage had instead become the guardian of humanity's agricultural future. "When I helped Captain Morrison in my cornfield," she told the assembled delegates, "I was simply doing what any neighbor would do, helping someone in need. I never imagined that one act of compassion would lead to feeding millions of people worldwide. But that's the power of choosing to help rather than to harm, to share rather than to hoard, to cooperate rather than to compete." The standing ovation that followed her speech reflected not just international appreciation for the agricultural renaissance program's success, but recognition of the fundamental truth she had demonstrated, that extraordinary achievements often begin with ordinary people making moral choices based on simple human decency. As Maria returned to Nebraska after her UN address, she found Esperanza Farm bustling with activity that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Agricultural delegations from 6 countries were learning crop rotation techniques from Miguel Santos. Environmental scientists were documenting the ecosystem improvements created by the enhancement technology. International development experts were planning implementations in regions facing food security challenges. But the sight that moved her most was watching her daughters working alongside visiting farmers, sharing knowledge that bridged generations and cultures. The farm that had been struggling to survive was now nurturing the future of global agriculture, proving that when technology serves human values rather than replacing them, the possibilities for positive change are limitless. The agricultural Renaissance program would continue to expand, eventually reaching every continent and transforming how humanity fed itself while caring for the planet. But its success would always be traced back to a Nebraska cornfield, where a struggling single mother proved that courage, compassion, and the willingness to help others remain the most powerful forces for creating a better world. 5 years after, Captain Morrison's crash landing transformed a struggling Nebraska farm into the epicenter of global agricultural revolution. Maria Vasquez faced her greatest challenge yet, preparing humanity for an expansion of consciousness that would make their previous achievements seem like mere prologue to an even greater story. The agricultural renaissance technology had evolved beyond enhancing crops and healing ecosystems. It was beginning to facilitate direct communication between human consciousness and the living intelligence of Earth itself. The revelation came during what had seemed like a routine monitoring session at Esperanza Farm. Dr. Chen's instruments detected energy patterns that defied conventional physics, suggesting that the Renaissance systems weren't just optimizing biological processes. They were creating bridges between different forms of consciousness that existed within natural systems. Maria, what we're seeing challenges our fundamental understanding of intelligence and awareness, Dr. Chen explained, her voice filled with scientific wonder and philosophical uncertainty. The technology isn't just enhancing plant growth, it's facilitating communication with what appears to be a planetary consciousness that has existed alongside human civilization for millennia. The implications were staggering. The agricultural enhancements, the ecosystem healing, the climate stabilization, all of these benefits had been side effects of a much larger process. The Renaissance technology was preparing humanity for conscious partnership with Earth's living intelligence, a relationship that could transform civilization's understanding of its place in the cosmos. Isabella, now completing her doctorate in consciousness studies and agricultural diplomacy, had been documenting unexplained phenomena at Renaissance sites worldwide. Farmers reported experiencing intuitive knowledge about their crops that went far beyond traditional agricultural wisdom. Environmental restoration projects were succeeding through approaches that seemed to emerge spontaneously from deep understanding of ecosystem needs. "It's like the land is teaching us," Isabella reported during a global conference of Renaissance coordinators. Farmers are developing abilities to sense what their crops need before problems manifest. Conservation workers are intuitively understanding how to heal damaged environments. We're not just using advanced technology, we're awakening dormant human capabilities for working with natural intelligence. Sophia's research had evolved into explorations of consciousness that bridged hard science with ancient wisdom traditions. Her work with marine restoration projects had revealed that the Renaissance technology was facilitating communication with ocean intelligence systems that had been trying to guide human environmental choices for decades. "The coral reefs aren't just recovering," Sophia explained to the International Marine Consciousness Research Council. "They're teaching us how to understand ocean systems as living, aware entities that can partner with human civilization if we learn to communicate with them properly." The discovery was transforming educational institutions worldwide. Universities were establishing consciousness communication programs that taught students to work with the Renaissance technology's expanded capabilities. Traditional agricultural schools were integrating meditation and awareness practices that helped farmers develop sensitivity to their land's needs and desires. Miguel Santos, whose family farm had become a pilgrimage site for consciousness researchers, found himself at the center of explorations that merged practical farming with mystical experience. "The technology opened a door," he explained to visiting scientists. "But walking through that door requires developing our own awareness, our own ability to listen to what the Earth is telling us." The implications for addressing global challenges were revolutionary. Climate change mitigation was accelerating as human communities learned to work consciously with natural systems rather than simply implementing technological solutions. Environmental restoration projects were succeeding at rates that exceeded scientific projections because they incorporated guidance from the ecosystems themselves. International relations were being transformed as nations discovered that the Renaissance technology worked most effectively when implemented through cooperative frameworks that honored both human needs and environmental intelligence. Diplomatic negotiations were incorporating consciousness communication protocols that helped resolve conflicts by addressing underlying ecological and social imbalances. Captain Morrison, now serving as Director of Consciousness Integration for the Global Renaissance Program, regularly briefed world leaders on the security implications of humanity's expanding awareness. Traditional concepts of national defense are becoming obsolete, he explained to the Global Security Council. When human communities are consciously connected to their local ecosystems, conflicts based on resource scarcity become impossible because abundance emerges through cooperation rather than competition. The program's influence on religious and spiritual communities was particularly profound. Faith traditions worldwide were discovering that the Renaissance technology was validating ancient teachings about the interconnectedness of all life. Interfaith collaborations were emerging around shared recognition that technological advancement and spiritual development were complementary rather than competing paths. Pope Francis, in his encyclical on the agricultural Renaissance, wrote, "This technology has revealed what mystics have always known, that creation is alive with intelligence and love, waiting for humanity to mature enough to become conscious, partners in the sacred work of caring for our common home." Similar statements from Buddhist leaders, Islamic scholars, Jewish rabbis, and indigenous spiritual teachers demonstrated that the Renaissance program was catalyzing a global spiritual awakening that transcended traditional religious boundaries while honoring the wisdom of all traditions. The economic implications of consciousness-integrated agriculture were reshaping global financial systems. Markets were developing new metrics for measuring prosperity that included environmental health, community well-being, and ecosystem vitality alongside traditional economic indicators. Investment strategies were incorporating consciousness integration assessments that evaluated projects based on their contributions to both human and planetary flourishing. Dr. Patricia Williams, who had transitioned from Secretary of Defense to Director of Planetary Consciousness Economics, was developing new models for resource allocation that optimized both human prosperity and environmental health. We're discovering that consciousness integration doesn't reduce economic efficiency. It reveals more sophisticated forms of abundance that benefit all participants in economic systems. The transformation was creating opportunities for social healing that extended far beyond agriculture. Communities implementing Renaissance systems were reporting reductions in crime, improvements in mental health, and increased social cohesion. As residents developed deeper connections to their local environments and to each other, urban planners were designing cities that incorporated consciousness communication principles, creating metropolitan areas that functioned as living systems rather than mechanical constructions. These conscious cities were demonstrating energy, efficiency, waste reduction, and quality of life improvements that exceeded anything achieved through conventional sustainable design approaches. The program's influence on global youth was inspiring a generation of leaders who understood intuitively that technological advancement and consciousness development were inseparable aspects of human evolution. Young people were embracing careers that integrated scientific innovation with contemplative practices, creating new professional fields that would define the next phase of human civilization. Educational institutions were restructuring curricula to incorporate consciousness development alongside technical training. Students were learning to approach their studies with awareness practices that enhanced both analytical thinking and intuitive understanding. The artificial separation between objective knowledge and subjective wisdom was dissolving as educators recognized that the most effective learning emerged from integrating both ways of knowing. Maria's role had evolved beyond agricultural coordination to encompass guidance for humanity's conscious evolution. World leaders regularly consulted her on issues ranging from environmental policy to international cooperation, recognizing that her experience facilitating communication between human communities and natural intelligence offered insights relevant to civilization's most pressing challenges. But she remained committed to maintaining her connection to the practical work of farming. Every day began with time spent in the fields at Esperanza Farm, listening to the land and receiving guidance for the day's activities. The farm that had nearly been lost to bankruptcy was now a training center where world leaders learned to communicate with planetary consciousness. The technological evolution of the Renaissance systems continued to reveal new capabilities that suggested they were facilitating humanity's participation in a galactic community of conscious civilizations. Astronomers were detecting patterns in the technology's energy signatures that corresponded to communications from other star systems, suggesting that Earth's consciousness awakening was part of a larger cosmic process. We're not just developing advanced agriculture, Dr. Chen reported to the Galactic Communication Research Council. We're being prepared for conscious participation in interstellar civilization. The Renaissance technology appears to be one component of a comprehensive system for integrating developing civilizations into cosmic consciousness networks. The implications for humanity's future were breathtaking. The species that had struggled with resource conflicts and environmental destruction was discovering its potential for conscious partnership with planetary and cosmic intelligence systems. The agricultural renaissance had been the first step in a transformation that would expand human awareness beyond Earth to encompass conscious relationships throughout the galaxy. International space agencies were collaborating on projects that incorporated consciousness communication principles into interplanetary exploration. Mars colonization efforts were being redesigned to establish conscious relationships with planetary intelligence systems rather than simply extracting resources for human use. The program's success was inspiring applications in fields that had never been associated with agricultural technology. Medical research was revealing connections between consciousness integration and healing that were revolutionizing healthcare. Psychological therapy was incorporating Renaissance principles to help patients develop healthier relationships with their emotions and their environment. Educational psychology was demonstrating that students learned most effectively when their studies were integrated with consciousness development practices. Children who grew up in Renaissance communities were displaying intellectual, emotional, and intuitive capabilities that exceeded previous assumptions about human potential. As Maria prepared for her address to the United Nations Consciousness Integration Assembly, a new international body established to coordinate humanity's conscious evolution, she reflected on the journey that had brought civilization from the brink of environmental collapse to the threshold of cosmic consciousness. The struggling single mother who had feared losing her family's farm had become the guardian of humanity's relationship with planetary intelligence. The daughters who had faced uncertain futures were now pioneering the integration of human consciousness with galactic awareness systems. The farm that had been threatened with foreclosure had become humanity's primary communication hub with cosmic intelligence networks. When I helped Captain Morrison in my cornfield 5 years ago, Maria told the assembled delegates, I thought I was simply helping an injured person who needed assistance. I never imagined that one act of compassion would begin humanity's conscious evolution toward cosmic citizenship. But that's the power of choosing love over fear, cooperation over competition, service over selfishness. The standing ovation that followed her speech reflected not just appreciation for the agricultural Renaissance program's achievements, but recognition of the fundamental truth she had demonstrated, that extraordinary transformation begins with ordinary people making moral choices based on compassion and courage. As she returned to Nebraska after the UN Assembly, Maria found Esperanza Farm preparing for its newest project, serving as Earth's primary communication center for the Galactic Consciousness Network. The farm that had struggled to grow corn was now facilitating humanity's integration into cosmic civilization. The sight that moved her most was watching her daughters working alongside cosmic consciousness researchers, helping humanity prepare for relationships with intelligences that spanned star systems and galaxies. The agricultural Renaissance had proven that when technology serves consciousness development, rather than replacing human awareness, the possibilities for transformation extend beyond Earth to encompass the entire cosmos. The program would continue to evolve, eventually facilitating humanity's conscious participation in galactic civilization while maintaining the values of compassion, cooperation, and service that had guided its development from the beginning. The success would always be traced back to a Nebraska cornfield where a struggling single mother proved that love, courage, and the willingness to help others remain the most powerful forces for conscious evolution throughout the universe. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.